In a small, forgotten town nestled deep in the heart of dense forest, there stood an abandoned asylum. Local legends spoke of the building as a place where time itself seemed to bend, where those who entered never came out the same. Many believed it was haunted, others thought it was cursed, but no one dared to enter, until the night when Daniel Cross, a man with nothing left to lose, made his way through the rusted gates. Daniel wasn't your typical explorer. He was a seasoned detective, known for cracking the most intricate cases. But this time it wasn't a case that brought him here, it was a personal quest. His younger brother, Luke, had gone missing years ago, and every trace led back to this desolate place. Determined to find answers, Daniel took a deep breath and stepped inside. The air was thick, suffocating. Dust motes swirled in the dim light as Daniel's footsteps echoed through the empty halls. The deeper he went, the more the asylum seemed to close in on him. Faded photographs lined the walls, showing patients who looked eerily familiar, faces Daniel had never seen, yet somehow recognized. Then he heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. "Daniel, Daniel." He whipped around, gun drawn, but no one was there. His pulse quickened. Was he losing his mind already? He pressed on, each step growing heavier, until he found himself standing before a massive steel door. It was marked with a single word, "Insight." The door creaked open as if inviting him in. Inside was a room unlike anything he had ever seen. It was filled with hundreds of floating screens, each one displaying fragments of different memories. Daniel approached one of the screens, and as he reached out, it flickered to life. It was a memory of his childhood, him and Luke playing in their backyard. But something was off. In the background, standing just behind them, was a shadowy figure with glowing eyes. Daniel recoiled in horror. This wasn't just a memory. It was being manipulated. He turned away, but the memories kept shifting, each screen now showing different points in his life. Some he remembered, others he had long forgotten. And in every single one, the same figure loomed, watching silently. Panicking, Daniel tried to leave, but the room began to distort. The walls stretched and twisted, and the screens merged into one massive projection. A deep, guttural voice filled the room. "You can't escape, Daniel. You've always been here. This is your reality." The asylum was no ordinary place. It was a labyrinth of memories and dimensions, trapping the souls of those who ventured too far into its depths. Daniel realized with horror that he hadn't been drawn here to find his brother. He had been summoned. The asylum itself was sentient, a malevolent entity feeding on the pain and suffering of those who entered. Suddenly, a door appeared at the far end of the room, glowing with a blinding white light. Daniel sprinted towards it, desperate for escape. But as he reached the threshold, he saw a figure standing on the other side. It was Luke, only it wasn't. His eyes were vacant, his face contorted in an unnatural smile. "Welcome home, brother," Luke whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Before Daniel could react, Luke's form shifted, melting away into a grotesque, shadowy mass. Tendrils of darkness shot out, wrapping around Daniel, pulling him in. He struggled, fighting with every ounce of strength, but the more he resisted, the deeper he sank into the shadows. "Don't you see?" The voice echoed again. "This is where you belong. You've always been part of me." As Daniel's vision blurred, he felt himself being dragged through time, through countless realities, each more twisted and terrifying than the last. He saw versions of himself trapped in endless loops, screaming for help. He saw Luke in countless guises, each one more monstrous than the last. But then, just as he was about to be consumed, a sudden surge of energy shot through him. A single thought broke through the fear and confusion: fight back. With a roar of defiance, Daniel summoned every memory, every ounce of willpower, and pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The shadowy tendrils hissed and recoiled as if burned. The room around him began to shatter like glass, fragments of memories breaking away and spiraling into the void. "I'm not a prisoner," Daniel growled through clenched teeth, "and I'm not your pawn." He focused on the one thing that grounded him, his brother. The real Luke, not the twisted apparition created by the asylum. In the whirlwind of shattered realities, Daniel glimpsed a single untouched memory, the day Luke went missing. He reached out, plunging his hand into the swirling vortex, and felt a shockwave of raw energy course through him. Suddenly, he was there, standing in the backyard of their childhood home, the sun casting long shadows across the grass. Luke, no more than 12 years old, was crouched by the old oak tree. But something was wrong. A dark figure stood beside him, its hand resting gently on Luke's shoulder. "Let him go," Daniel shouted. The figure turned slowly. Its face was a void of swirling darkness, yet its gaze seemed to pierce straight into Daniel's soul. "You can't save him," it murmured, its voice a chorus of whispers. "He chose to stay, just like you." With a flash, Daniel was ripped away from the scene, back into the warped halls of the asylum. He staggered, trying to regain his balance. The asylum's walls pulsed like a living organism, veins of darkness crisscrossing the surface. It was fighting back, trying to overwhelm him, but Daniel wouldn't let it. He had seen the truth. He knew what he needed to do. He wasn't just an outsider in this place. He was a key, an anchor holding the fabric of the asylum's reality together. He realized with a shiver that the asylum had been feeding off his own memories, shaping itself around his fears and regrets. If he could confront those fears, he might just be able to tear this place apart. Taking a deep breath, Daniel focused inward. One by one, he began to call forth his worst memories, the ones he had buried deep. The day his parents died, the case that ended in tragedy, the look of betrayal on his best friend's face when he couldn't save him. Each memory was a wound, a scar on his soul, but he embraced them, letting the pain wash over him. The asylum shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the walls, spilling blinding white light. The shadowy figure shrieked, its form wavering as if it were being torn apart. "You're unraveling," Daniel said coldly, stepping forward. "You can't control me anymore." The figure lunged, but Daniel didn't flinch. He reached out, grabbing it by the throat. The moment his hand made contact, a torrent of memories flooded through him. Hundreds, thousands of voices, faces, all the souls the asylum had consumed over the years. They were all trapped, lost in an endless loop of suffering. "Let them go," Daniel demanded, his voice resonating with the power he hadn't known he possessed. "All of them." The figure thrashed, but Daniel tightened his grip. With a roar, he pulled, tearing the entity free from the very walls of the asylum. The entire structure trembled, the lights flickering wildly. The entity's form shifted and splintered, unraveling like a skein of thread, and then, with a deafening crack, it shattered into nothingness. Silence fell. Daniel stood alone in a crumbling hallway, the walls peeling away to reveal a vast star-filled void beyond. The asylum was disintegrating, its power broken. He could see faint, ghostly figures, other lost souls submerging from the shadows, their faces filled with confusion and relief. But one figure remained solid, standing at the far end of the hall. It was Luke. "Is it really you?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. Luke nodded, a sad smile on his face. "I never left Danny. I've been waiting. But you were always stronger." Daniel took a tentative step forward. "I'm not leaving without you. You have to," Luke replied gently. "This place is falling apart. If you stay, it'll consume you." "No," Daniel said fiercely. "We go together. I'm not losing you again." Luke's smile widened, and for a moment, he looked like the kid Daniel remembered. "You already saved me, Danny. Now save yourself." The ground trembled violently as the asylum continued to collapse. Walls crumbled into dust, and the floor beneath them began to disintegrate. Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing against Luke's. For a heartbeat, everything was still. "Goodbye, brother," Luke whispered. And then he was gone, dissolving into a swirl of light. Daniel stumbled back, pain searing through his chest. He felt himself being pulled, yanked through the collapsing ruins of the asylum. Memories flashed past him, scenes from a life he had almost forgotten. And then, with a final shuddering breath, the world around him shattered completely, and he found himself lying on the ground outside the gates of the asylum, gasping for air. Daniel lay on the cold, damp ground, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The air outside felt strangely clean and fresh, as if he had been holding his breath for an eternity and was finally able to breathe again. He pushed himself up, glancing back at the asylum, but it wasn't there. The entire structure had vanished, replaced by an empty, overgrown field. The iron gates were twisted and rusted, barely holding onto their hinges. There was no sign of the sinister building that had stood there moments ago. No crumbling walls, no broken windows, no lingering shadows. It was as if the asylum had never existed. Was it all in my mind? Daniel muttered, his voice raw. He felt disoriented, like he had been torn from one reality and thrust into another. But something was different. He glanced down at his hands. They were trembling, but not with fear or exhaustion. They glowed faintly, a soft blue light emanating from his fingertips. He touched his face, his chest. No wounds, no injuries. Just a strange pulsing energy coursing through him. Then he heard it, a soft hum, like a distant melody. It seemed to come from within him, resonating through his very bones. With a jolt, Daniel realized what it was. The asylum's power. It hadn't been destroyed, it had been absorbed. By him. He staggered to his feet, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. He could feel the echoes of the asylum's twisted dimensions swirling inside him, a maelstrom of broken realities and lost souls. He could sense the vast, incomprehensible force that had once controlled the asylum, now tethered to his own consciousness. "I can still save them," he whispered, his eyes widening. The souls he had glimpsed inside, the ones who had been trapped, tormented, he could feel them, faint but present, lingering in the recesses of his mind. They were no longer prisoners of the asylum. They were part of him now, but there was something else too. A darker presence, lurking in the shadows of his thoughts. The entity, the thing that had masqueraded as Luke, that had tried to consume him, it was still there, weakened but not defeated. It pulsed with malevolence, its whispering voice coiling through his mind. "You think you've won," it hissed. "This is only the beginning. You are mine now, Daniel. We are one." "No," Daniel snarled, clenching his fists. "I'm not yours, and I never will be." The ground beneath him trembled, and Daniel felt a surge of power ripple through him. The world around him blurred, shifting like a mirage. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was being pulled back into the asylum's hellish maze. But then the power stabilized, solidifying into something new, something that he could control. Daniel took a deep breath, focusing on the sensation. He could feel the boundaries of reality bending, the barriers between worlds weakening. If he wanted, he could open a doorway to anywhere, any place or time. He could rewrite history, reshape events. He could bring Luke back. The temptation was overwhelming. He could have everything he'd lost, undo all the pain and suffering. But at what cost? The entity inside him whispered promises, tempting him with visions of a perfect world. A world where his brother was alive, where none of the tragedies that had scarred him had ever happened. "Just let go, Daniel," the voice crooned. "Accept what you are. With my power, we can create a new reality. One without pain, without loss, without fear." Daniel hesitated, the glow around his hands intensifying. The visions swirled in front of him, Luke smiling, his parents alive, his friends unhurt. It was so close, so tangible, he could almost reach out and touch it. But then he saw something else, lurking at the edges of the perfect world the entity promised. A shadow, growing and spreading, corrupting everything it touched. "No," Daniel said softly, his voice trembling but resolute. "That's not real, it's just another prison." He closed his eyes, shutting out the visions. With a surge of willpower, he pushed back against the entity's influence, forcing the dark presence deeper into the recesses of his mind. The glow around him faded, replaced by a calm, steady light. "I'm not going to use this power to change the past," he said quietly. "I'm going to use it to set things right." The entity screamed, thrashing against the mental chains Daniel had woven around it, but couldn't break free. Slowly, the presence weakened, its voice fading to a faint whisper. "You can't keep me locked away forever, Daniel," it murmured, its tone dripping with venom. I am you. And one day you'll need me. Maybe, Daniel whispered back. But not today. With a final shuddering breath, he opened his eyes. The world around him snapped back into focus. The field was still empty, the air crisp and cool. But everything felt different, brighter, sharper, more alive. He could feel the potential humming beneath the surface, a new power that he barely understood. But he would learn, he would master it, and he would find a way to free the souls still trapped within him, the ones the asylum had consumed. Because that's what this was really about, not power, not revenge, but redemption. Daniel turned away from the empty field, a new sense of purpose burning in his chest. There was a whole world out there filled with mysteries and secrets, and now he had the means to uncover them. Story escape, he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. Guess I've got a lot more stories to tell. Daniel's journey had only just begun. He felt the asylum's power simmering within him, an immense force he barely understood. But he knew one thing for sure. There were others out there, other places like the asylum, dark, twisted realities where people were trapped, just like Luke had been, and he was the only one who could reach them. With a deep breath, Daniel raised his hand, focusing on the energy coursing through him. The air around him shimmered, and slowly, a portal began to take shape, a swirling vortex of light and shadow. He didn't know where it would lead, but that was part of the thrill. Wherever he went, he would find answers. Stepping through the portal was like diving into a freezing river. His body felt weightless, suspended between worlds, as colors and shapes blurred around him. There was a flash of blinding light, and then he was standing in the middle of a bustling city street. Daniel blinked, disoriented. Tall skyscrapers loomed overhead, neon signs flickering in the evening gloom. The smell of exhaust and fried food filled the air. People rushed past, completely oblivious to the man who had just materialized out of thin air. "Where am I?" he muttered under his breath. He glanced around, trying to get his bearings. The city felt familiar, yet different. The cars were sleek and futuristic, their engines humming silently. A massive billboard overhead displayed a news broadcast in crisp, three-dimensional clarity. The headline read, "City under siege, mysterious disappearances continue. Authorities baffled." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Another place, another puzzle to solve. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the billboard, and felt a pulse of energy. The asylum's power flared, and for a split second, he could see beneath the surface of reality. Layers upon layers of time and space, interwoven like threads in a tapestry. This city was a nexus, a focal point of distorted reality. Whatever was happening here, it was connected to the same dark forces that had twisted the asylum. "Okay," Daniel murmured, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Time to do what I do best." He moved through the city like a shadow, slipping between alleys and side streets, his senses on high alert. The asylum's power seemed to guide him, pulling him towards something or someone. As he turned a corner, he spotted a small, dilapidated building tucked away between two towering skyscrapers. A sign above the door read, "Vanished, investigating the unexplainable." Intrigued, Daniel pushed the door open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old books and incense. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with files, photographs, and strange artifacts. A woman sat behind a cluttered desk, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a computer screen. She looked up as Daniel entered, her eyes widening in surprise. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, standing up abruptly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I could say the same about you." The woman frowned, studying him closely. "You're different. I can see it in your aura. You've been touched by something powerful." "Yeah, you could say that," Daniel replied, glancing around the room. "I'm looking for answers. There's something happening in this city, isn't there? People disappearing, reality shifting. It's all connected." The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "My name is Maya. I run this place, what's left of it anyway. We investigate paranormal phenomena, disappearances, things that defy explanation. And lately, the city's been changing. Places appearing and disappearing, people vanishing without a trace. The police are calling it a series of kidnappings, but it's more than that. She gestured to a wall covered in photographs and maps, red strings crisscrossing between them. I've been tracking the disappearances. There's a pattern, a convergence point. Everything leads back to one place, the clock tower. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. He could sense it. The clock tower was the place where the fabric of reality was thin, where different worlds bled into one another. It was exactly the kind of place the entity inside him would seek out. "What's at the clock tower?" he asked quietly. Maya shook her head. "No one knows. It's been abandoned for years, but lately people have been reporting strange lights, voices, and those who go there don't come back." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "I need to see it for myself." Maya looked at him skeptically. "You're not like the others who've tried. You're stronger, but even you might not make it out." Daniel gave her a crooked smile. "I've been through worse. Besides, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Maya hesitated, then handed him a small, worn key. "This will get you inside, but be careful. Whatever's in there, it's not of this double world." Daniel took the key, feeling its cold weight in his hand. "Thank you." As he turned to leave, Maya called out, "Wait, if you make it out, come back. I want to know what's really going on." Daniel paused at the door, glancing back at her. "I will, and if I don't, well, I guess you'll have another mystery to solve." With that, he stepped out into the night. The streets were empty now, the city eerily silent. He made his way toward the clock tower, its looming silhouette cutting a jagged shape against the dark sky. The asylum's power buzzed beneath his skin, a restless, hungry energy that seemed to resonate with the tower. Daniel tightened his grip on the key. Whatever awaited him inside the clock tower, he was ready. This time, he wasn't just fighting to escape. He was fighting to uncover the truth, to tear back the veil of reality and confront the darkness head-on. The clock tower's massive door groaned as Daniel pushed it open. A cold wind swept out, carrying with it the faintest echoes of laughter that sounded disturbingly like his own. Daniel stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind him, and then the world tilted, reality splintering into chaos as the darkness welcomed him home. The air inside the clock tower felt thick, almost viscous, as if every breath Daniel took was being weighed down by an invisible force. The walls, covered in layers of dust and mold, seemed to pulse faintly, as though the building itself was alive and aware of his presence. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and contorting like living things. Daniel gripped the small key tightly, feeling its metal heat up in his hand. The energy from the asylum surged within him, reacting to the dark power radiating from this place. He knew he was stepping into something far more dangerous than the asylum, a place where the lines between realities blurred, where each step could lead him deeper into the unknown. He took a cautious step forward, and the floor beneath him creaked ominously. The dim light from the street lamps outside barely penetrated the murky gloom of the clock tower's interior. A spiral staircase wound up into darkness, and Daniel could faintly hear the sound of ticking, like the steady heartbeat of a monstrous creature. He moved silently, ascending the staircase, his senses attuned to every creak and groan of the old wood. As he climbed higher, the sound of ticking grew louder, reverberating through his chest. It wasn't just the sound of a clock, it was a rhythmic pulse, syncing with his own heartbeat. When he reached the first landing, he found himself standing in front of a massive, ornate clock face embedded in the wall. The hands of the clock were frozen at exactly midnight. Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold glass surface, and felt a shock of energy jolt through him. The hands twitched, then slowly began to move, ticking backward. "Midnight," he whispered, eyes narrowing. Midnight wasn't an hour, it was a threshold, a point of no return. The clock hands spun faster and faster until they became a blur. The world around him wavered, the walls shifting and melting into shadow. Then, with a deafening chime, the clock struck 12, and reality shattered. Daniel was hurled into darkness. He fell, tumbling through a void of swirling colors and distorted shapes. Voices whispered all around him, some familiar, others terrifyingly alien. He caught glimpses of himself in different forms: an old man, a child, a faceless figure cloaked in shadow. Each one stared back at him with eyes full of knowledge and fear. With a jarring thud, he landed on solid ground. The air was different here, heavy with the scent of ozone and something acrid. He looked up, disoriented, and found himself standing in a vast chamber filled with countless gears and cogs, all turning in perfect synchronization. The center of the chamber was dominated by a massive clock mechanism, its gears interlocking in impossibly complex patterns. Suspended above it was a pendulum, swinging slowly, each movement sending ripples through the very fabric of space and time. But it was what stood at the base of the mechanism that made Daniel's blood run cold. It was a man, no, not a man, but a creature that wore the guise of one. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. Its eyes were hollow, glowing with a sickly yellow light. And its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile that seemed to split its face in two. "Welcome, Daniel," the creature purred, its voice a distorted echo of his own. "I've been expecting you." Daniel took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. But he held his ground, clenching his fists. "Who are you?" The creature's smile widened and it bowed mockingly. "I am the keeper of time, the watcher of realities. I am the one who maintains the delicate balance between worlds. And you are an anomaly." "An anomaly?" Daniel echoed, his eyes narrowing. "Yes," the keeper hissed, circling him slowly. "You are neither fully part of this world nor the next. You are a bridge, a doorway through which time and space can bend and twist, a rare and precious thing, but also a dangerous one." The gears above them groaned, the entire mechanism shuddering as if responding to the keeper's words. Daniel felt a surge of power within him, the asylum's energy flaring up, pushing against the keeper's influence. "I'm not here to be toyed with," Daniel said coldly. "I want answers. What happened to this city? What are you doing here?" The keeper chuckled, a sound like grinding metal. "This city is merely the stage, Daniel. The play is much grander than you can imagine. You see, every reality has a breaking point, a moment where the fabric of existence weakens. And when that moment comes, I intervene." It gestured to the gears, and Daniel realized with a sinking feeling that each one was connected to a different place, a different reality. Tiny, ghostly images flickered across the surfaces of the gears, cities, people, entire worlds shifting and changing with each turn of the mechanism. "You're manipulating time," Daniel whispered, "twisting it, breaking it. I am perfecting it," the keeper corrected sharply. "Every world, every reality is flawed, Daniel. Imperfect. I simply refine them. And sometimes to create perfection, one must erase the mistakes." A cold dread settled in Daniel's chest. "The disappearances, you're erasing people." "Not just people," the keeper murmured, its gaze piercing. "Potential. Possibility. I cleanse the worlds of what could be and leave only what should be." The entity inside Daniel stirred, a low growl vibrating through his mind. "He's lying," it whispered. "He doesn't seek perfection. He seeks control. He's trying to trap you, just like he trapped the others." Daniel took a deep breath, forcing the dark presence back. "What about me?" he demanded. "Why am I here?" The keeper's eyes gleamed. "Because you are a variable I cannot predict, a force that could either destroy or complete my design. I need you, Daniel. I need your power. Together, we could create the perfect reality, one where there is no pain, no loss, no suffering." Daniel's hands tightened into fists. The asylum's power surged within him, a roaring tide of energy. He could feel it, the potential to rip this place apart, to tear through the very fabric of time itself. But he also knew the danger. One wrong move and he could unravel everything, including himself. "I'm not your puppet," he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I won't let you use me." The keeper's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Then you leave me no choice." With a wave of its hand, the gears above them began to spin wildly, the entire mechanism roaring to life. The ground trembled, and Daniel felt the air crackle with raw energy. The pendulum above swung faster, its arc widening until it was slicing through the very fabric of reality. "Choose, Daniel," the keeper whispered, its voice reverberating through his skull. "Join me, or be erased like all the others." Daniel's vision blurred as the power inside him flared, clashing with the keeper's influence. He could feel the world shifting around him, timelines fracturing and splintering. He was being torn apart, pulled in 1,000 directions at once. But then he saw it, a single fragile thread of light winding its way through the chaos. It was Luke, the memory of his brother, the promise he had made. With a roar of defiance, Daniel reached out, grasping the thread. Light exploded around him, and for a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. And then, reality snapped back into focus, and Daniel found himself standing in a completely different place. He was no longer in the clock tower, the vast chamber of gears and cogs, the looming presence of the keeper. Everything had vanished. Instead, he stood in a serene landscape that defied description. The ground beneath his feet was a smooth, glass-like surface reflecting a sky filled with swirling colors. Vibrant purples, deep blues, and flashes of emerald green. Floating islands drifted lazily in the air, each one tethered by glowing strands of energy that arched and twisted like veins. Strange, luminous flowers bloomed around him, their petals shifting and shimmering with every breath of wind. It was beautiful, otherworldly, and utterly disorienting. "Where?" Daniel murmured, turning slowly. His voice seemed to echo strangely in the vast emptiness. "What is this place?" A soft, familiar voice answered him. "It's a refuge, a place between places." Daniel whipped around and saw Luke standing a few feet away, his form glowing faintly. He looked the same as he had in the memory, the younger brother Daniel remembered, untouched by the years that had passed since his disappearance. But there was something else too, a weight in his eyes, a sadness that hadn't been there before. "Luke," Daniel whispered, his heart pounding. "Is it really you?" Luke nodded, smiling softly. "It's me, Danny. I'm here." Daniel took a hesitant step forward, his hands trembling. "How? I thought you were GG1. "I was," Luke said gently. "I'm still not really whole. I'm just a fragment of what I was, a piece left behind. But you pulled me out, brought me here. This is a place outside of time and space, a sanctuary from the Keeper's grasp." Daniel's mind spun, trying to process everything. The Keeper, he said he was erasing people, realities. But you, he can't destroy everything. Luke interrupted softly. "Pieces remain, echoes. And sometimes those echoes find each other, gather in places like this. That's what you're seeing, fragments of forgotten worlds." Daniel looked around, noticing faint figures in the distance, shadows of people, places, moments, all drifting in and out of focus. A woman cradling a child. A man standing on a cliff, staring into the horizon. A cityscape illuminated by a crimson sun. Each one flickered like a mirage, barely solid. Are they real?" Daniel asked, his voice catching. Luke shook his head. "They were. Now they're just memories. This place is a last refuge for what the Keeper has erased. It's where all lost possibilities come to rest." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. "So you're just a memory? A ghost?" "Not exactly," Luke said quietly. "I'm more than that, thanks to you. When you used the Asylum's power, you reached beyond time and space. You saved me, Danny, but I'm still incomplete." Daniel's fists clenched, anger surging through him. "I want to make you whole again, Luke. I want to bring you back for real. There has to be a way." "There is," Luke murmured, his gaze turning distant. "But it won't be easy. You've only seen a fraction of what the Keeper is capable of. He's not just some entity guarding time. He is time. He's intertwined with every reality, every possibility. To defeat him, you'd have to unravel him completely." "Then that's what I'll do," Daniel said fiercely. "I'll destroy him, tear him out of every reality he's corrupted." Luke shook his head. "It's not that simple. If you kill him, every reality he's touched will unravel. Every person, every world he's manipulated, they'll all cease to exist." Daniel stared at his brother, shock and confusion warring within him. but there has to be another way. Something I can do to stop him without destroying everything. Luke looked down, his expression pained. There is, but it's dangerous, Danny. Even more dangerous than the asylum or the clock tower. You'll have to go to the heart of the Keeper's realm, to the Nexus, the point where all realities converge. It's there that he draws his power. If you can disrupt it, sever his connection, you could weaken him enough to make him vulnerable. Daniel felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by doubt. What's the catch? Luke's gaze met his, full of sorrow. The Nexus is a place of pure chaos, where every possibility and outcome overlap. It's unstable, constantly shifting. If you lose focus for even a second, you could be lost forever. And even if you succeed, even if you severed the Keeper's connection, the backlash could destroy you. Daniel swallowed hard, his resolve hardening. I don't care. I'm not leaving you like this. I'm not leaving anyone like this. Luke's form flickered, his face filled with both pride and fear. You're stronger than I ever imagined, Danny, but please, be careful. Don't let your anger consume you. The Keeper will try to use it against you. I won't let him, Daniel promised. I'm going to end this, one way or another. Luke nodded slowly, then stepped forward, reaching out. His hand passed through Daniel's, a faint glow spreading from the point of contact. Daniel felt a surge of warmth, of connection, a reminder of everything he was fighting for. Find the Nexus, Luke whispered. And when you do, remember who you are. Remember what you're fighting for. Before Daniel could respond, the ground beneath him shuddered. The colors of the sky darkened, the luminous flowers wilting and fading away. A powerful force began to pull at him, yanking him backward. He struggled, trying to hold on, but it was like being caught in a tidal wave. Luke, he shouted, reaching out desperately. But Luke's form was already dissolving, his voice echoing faintly in the distance. I'll be with you, Danny, always. With a final wrenching pull, Daniel was torn from the serene landscape and plunged into darkness. He tumbled through the void, feeling the asylum's power flare up within him, steadying his descent. Shapes and images blurred past him, glimpses of worlds, of lives, of moments both beautiful and tragic. He saw versions of himself, each one facing a different struggle, a different challenge. And then, in the midst of the chaos, he saw it. A massive structure loomed before him, a tower that stretched beyond sight, its surface covered in a web of pulsing energy. At its peak, a sphere of blinding light crackled and flared, sending out tendrils of power that connected to countless realities. The Nexus. Daniel gritted his teeth, his gaze locking onto the distant tower. He could feel the Keeper's presence there, vast and oppressive, radiating control and dominance. I'm coming for you, Daniel whispered, his voice filled with determination. And I'm going to break you. With a surge of energy, he shot forward, hurtling through the chaos toward the heart of the Keeper's domain. The final battle was about to begin. The pull of the Nexus was like a gravitational force, an irresistible draw that yanked at every fiber of Daniel's being. His body, or what remained of it in this warped space, felt as if it were being torn apart and reassembled with every heartbeat. He focused on the tower in the distance, its shape becoming clearer as he hurtled forward. The Nexus loomed impossibly large, a colossal monolith of intertwining metal and light. Gears the size of mountains turned slowly along its surface, and arcs of energy crackled and pulsed in every direction. The air around it shimmered with the sheer intensity of power, distorting reality itself. As Daniel approached, he felt his own presence, the energy of the asylum within him, resonate with the Nexus, as if acknowledging an old adversary. He landed hard on a vast platform that spiraled around the base of the tower. The ground beneath him was smooth, made of a strange, translucent material that seemed to ripple like water. He stood up slowly, shaking off the dizziness. The platform stretched endlessly in all directions, with no sign of where it began or ended, and at the center of it, just a few steps away, was a doorway. It was an archway carved out of pure energy, its edges crackling with blue and gold light. Through it, Daniel could see a swirling maelstrom of images, memories, worlds. Moments in time, all colliding and merging in a chaotic dance. This is it, he murmured to himself, the threshold to the nexus. He took a deep breath and stepped through. Instantly, the world shifted. Daniel found himself standing in a place that defied all logic. He was in a vast open space with no clear boundaries, no walls, no sky, no ground. Just endless strands of energy, weaving together like the threads of a tapestry. Each strand glowed with a different hue, pulsating with life. He could see worlds within them, tiny glimpses of realities in flux, cities rising and falling, stars being born and dying, people living and vanishing. And at the very center of it all, suspended in a swirling vortex of power, was the Keeper. The entity no longer wore its human guise. It had transformed into a towering figure of pure energy, its form constantly shifting and warping. Its eyes were twin orbs of searing white light, and its voice, when it spoke, was like 1,000 voices layered together. "Welcome to my domain, Daniel," the Keeper boomed, its voice reverberating through the very fabric of the Nexus. "You have traveled far, and yet you still do not understand. This place is the heart of everything, the beginning and the end. You cannot defeat me here." Daniel squared his shoulders, feeling the asylum's power thrumming beneath his skin. "You're wrong. I faced you in different forms, different realities. I know what you are, an aberration, a parasite feeding on possibilities." The Keeper laughed, a sound like glass shattering. "And what are you? A mere speck, drifting between worlds. You think yourself special, but you are nothing. A fleeting moment in the grand scheme of eternity." The tendrils of energy that surrounded the Keeper lashed out, striking at Daniel with blinding speed. He barely managed to dodge, the force of the impact sending shock waves through the Nexus. He countered with a surge of his own power, sending a wave of blue energy crashing into the Keeper's form. The entity staggered, its light dimming for a fraction of a second, but then it reared back, unleashing a torrent of energy that tore through the Nexus. Reality itself splintered around them, fragments of worlds spinning out of control. Daniel felt himself being pushed to the brink, the pressure of the Keeper's power threatening to crush him. But he held on, drawing strength from every memory, every moment that had led him here. He thought of Luke, of the promise he'd made. He thought of all the lost souls still trapped, still suffering because of this creature. "No more," he growled, his voice echoing through the void. "This ends now." He reached deep within himself, tapping into the core of the asylum's energy. He could feel the darkness there, the malevolent force that had once tried to consume him. But now it was his to command. He channeled it, shaping it into a weapon, a blade of pure, concentrated power that crackled with blue and black lightning. The Keeper paused, its form flickering uncertainly. "What are you doing?" it demanded, its voice tinged with something Daniel hadn't heard before, fear. Daniel raised the blade, his gaze locked on the towering entity. "I'm severing your connection to everything." With a fierce cry, he swung the blade down. The moment the blade struck, a blinding flash of light erupted from the point of impact. The Nexus shuddered violently, the strands of reality around them unraveling. The Keeper screamed, a sound of pure agony that seemed to reverberate through every corner of existence. "You can't, no!" the Keeper shrieked, its form writhing as the blade cut through it. "You'll destroy everything." Daniel gritted his teeth, pushing harder. "No, I'll destroy you." The blade sank deeper, and the Keeper's form began to disintegrate, pieces of it breaking off and dissolving into the void. The strands of reality twisted and snapped, one by one, severing the Keeper's hold on them. "Stop!" the Keeper wailed, its voice growing weaker. "If you do this, if you cut me, you'll..." With a final, powerful thrust, Daniel drove the blade through the center of the Keeper's form. There was a moment of absolute stillness, and then a massive explosion of light and sound erupted from the Keeper's body, sending shockwaves through the Nexus. Daniel was thrown back, tumbling through the void as the Keeper's form shattered into a million pieces. Each fragment of the entity dissolved into the surrounding strands of reality, causing them to flare and warp. The entire Nexus trembled, the strands of energy unraveling and reweaving themselves in chaotic patterns. For a terrifying moment, Daniel felt as if he were falling through an endless abyss, the very concept of reality slipping away. But then, Slowly, the chaos began to settle. The strands of reality realigned, the colors stabilizing. The vortex of power at the center of the nexus dimmed, shrinking until it was no more than a faint glow. Daniel floated in the calm that followed, his body aching, his mind numb. He looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened. The Keeper was gone. Its presence, its power, everything had been severed. He could feel it, like a weight that had been lifted from his soul. But as the reality around him began to solidify, he realized something else. The nexus wasn't collapsing, it was healing. The strands of energy were weaving together, forming a new pattern, a pattern that didn't include the Keeper's influence. Daniel felt a surge of hope, but also a pang of fear. He had done it. He had severed the Keeper's hold. But at what cost? He glanced down at himself, half expecting to see his body disintegrating, his own connection to reality unraveling. But he was still there, solid, whole. And then, from the soft glow at the heart of the nexus, he heard a voice. Soft, familiar. Danny. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He turned, eyes wide, and saw a figure stepping out of the light. It was Luke, not a memory, not a ghost, but Luke, real and whole, his eyes filled with wonder and relief. "You did it," Luke whispered, his voice trembling. "You freed us." Daniel took a step forward, his breath hitching. "Luke, is it really you?" Luke nodded, smiling through tears. "It's me, Danny. I'm here. We're here." Behind Luke, more figures began to emerge. Faces Daniel recognized, souls he had glimpsed in the asylum and in the nexus. People who had been erased, forgotten, trapped in a limbo of broken realities. They all stood there, watching him with gratitude and hope. "You saved us all," Luke said softly. "You broke the cycle." Daniel felt tears prick his own eyes, a wave of emotion crashing over him. His voice cracked, and he shook his head, unable to find the words. Luke stepped forward, wrapping his arms around his brother. The embrace was warm, real, solid. "Thank you, Danny," Luke whispered, "for everything." The light around them brightened, enveloping them in a comforting glow. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt at peace. He clung to his brother, the warmth of the embrace anchoring him in this surreal, shifting reality. The figures around them, all those lost souls who had been trapped and twisted by the Keeper's manipulations, began to dissolve into motes of light. Their smiles, their whispers of gratitude, filled the air like a gentle breeze. "Where will they go?" Daniel asked softly, his voice tinged with awe and sorrow. "They're returning to their rightful places," Luke explained, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "To the worlds and lives they were taken from. You've restored the balance, Danny. Without the Keeper, time and reality are finding their natural paths again." Daniel watched as the lights swirled around them, the glow becoming brighter and brighter until it was hard to distinguish where the nexus ended and the light began. The figures faded one by one, their presence a fleeting, bittersweet reminder of what had been lost and now, finally, regained. "What about us?" Daniel whispered, a note of fear creeping into his voice. He tightened his grip on Luke, afraid to let go. "What happens to us?" Luke pulled back slightly, looking into his brother's eyes with a sad, understanding smile. "We can't stay here, Danny. The nexus is changing, healing. It's not a place for us anymore." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "No, I can't lose you again. Not after everything." "You won't," Luke interrupted gently. "You'll carry me with you, always. You have the power to return to your reality, your life. But I belong somewhere else now." "No, Daniel started, but Luke placed a hand on his shoulder, a comforting, grounding touch. "I'm part of this place, Danny. I was part of what was broken, but now I'm part of what's being made whole." Luke's smile widened, though his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm not disappearing. I'm just finding my place just like everyone else." Daniel's hands shook as he tried to hold on to his brother, but he could already feel the world shifting around them, pulling them apart. The light grew brighter, filling his vision, his senses. He felt weightless, suspended in the very fabric of time and space. He wanted to scream, to shout, to defy whatever force was trying to separate them. But then, amidst the blinding light, Luke's voice came through, clear and calm. "Live, Danny. Go back. Live the life you deserve. And remember, I'm proud of you. I always have been." And then, like the others, Luke began to dissolve into light, his form breaking apart into shimmering particles that swirled around Daniel in a final loving embrace. "No," Daniel cried, reaching out, his fingers grasping at the fading motes of light. "Luke, please, don't leave me." But it was too late. The last traces of his brother vanished, carried away on the gentle currents of the Nexus. Daniel stood alone in the vast, glowing expanse, tears streaming down his face, his heart aching with both grief and an inexplicable sense of closure. For a moment, everything was still. Then the world around him shifted, the light dimming, the boundaries of the Nexus blurring. Daniel felt a pull, different from before. It was gentle, insistent, tugging him back to where he belonged. He let it take him, his eyes closing as the Nexus unraveled around him, its purpose fulfilled. The light faded, the colors dimmed, and Daniel felt himself falling, no, floating, through darkness. He drifted, weightless, as scenes and moments flashed around him like distant stars. He saw glimpses of his life, memories of the asylum, of the battles he'd fought, the pain he'd endured. And then he saw something else, a door. It stood alone in the darkness, a simple wooden door with a brass handle. It glowed softly, invitingly. Daniel reached out, his hand trembling, and turned the handle. The door swung open, and he stepped out into a quiet, sunlit street. Blinking against the sudden brightness, Daniel looked around, disoriented. He was standing outside a small cafe, the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods wafting through the air. People strolled by, chatting and laughing, completely unaware of the impossible journey he had just taken. It was an ordinary day in an ordinary world. But something was different. He was different. He glanced down at his hands, half expecting to see them glowing or vibrating with residual power. But they were just hands, solid, warm, real. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs, grounding him in the moment. It was over. The Keeper was gone. The Nexus was healed. And he was free. For a long time, Daniel just stood there, soaking in the sights and sounds of the world he had fought so hard to protect. He felt an ache deep in his chest, a bittersweet pain that would never fully go away. But it was a pain he could live with, a pain that reminded him of what he had lost and what he had saved. "Thank you, Luke," he whispered, his voice carrying on the breeze. "I'll never forget." And then, slowly, he turned and began to walk. There was so much he didn't know, so much he had yet to discover. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The asylum's power was gone, its darkness no longer a part of him. He was just Daniel Cross now, a man who had faced the impossible and come out the other side. He had a life to live, a world to explore, and somewhere deep inside, he knew that Luke was watching, smiling, content in the knowledge that his brother would be okay. Daniel crossed the street, his steps light, his heart steady. The sun shone brightly overhead, warming his skin. He glanced up, squinting against the light, and smiled. The future stretched out before him, endless and filled with possibility. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Daniel was ready to embrace it. The end.